Right. With that, let's also tell you how U.S. President Donald Trump has been facing political pressure in his own country as the Democrats have now escalated efforts to question his fitness for office. Well, more than 85 House and Senate Democrats are now calling for Trump to be either impeached or removed through the 25th Amendment. This move comes after Trump's recent remarks, including a whole civilization will die tonight, in a clear reference to Iran. Lawmakers have now introduced a striking proposal tied to the 25th Amendment, aiming to create a formal mechanism to assess whether Donald Trump can still serve. Under the proposal, congressional leaders will each appoint 2 members. It would include 4 former high-ranking executive branch officials, specifically vice presidents, secretaries of state, defense and treasury, attorneys general, and, of course, surgeon generals. The panel will include a final chair as well, selected by the commission itself, potentially a physician or a senior statesperson.
Hello guys, Dr. John is here. So what just happened, guys? Democrats in Congress are actively laying groundwork to end Trump's presidency early, moving formal impeachment articles, 25th Amendment discussions, and resignation demands, citing his handling of the Iran war and apocalyptic rhetoric as proof he's unfit for the nuclear codes. This is not political theater. It's a constitutional process with no real parallel in American history, unfolding in real time while Trump remains in office. Let me take you through exactly what's happening and why this moment is so significant. Trump thought he had won re-election, and he was going to control the government unchecked. Trump thought he had a compliant Republican Congress that would let him do whatever he wanted without any resistance. Trump thought Democrats were powerless to stop him and that he could wage war and make threats without facing any kind of political pushback.
But removing Donald Trump remains unlikely, as this process requires the vice president, in this case of J.D. Vance, to agree with the commission's findings. Congress will then need a 2/3 majority vote in both chambers to make any removal permanent. Now, the 25th Amendment, remember, was formulated in 1967 after the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. It ensures a legal mechanism designating a head of state when the president is disabled or dead. It also includes provisions for both voluntary and involuntary removal of a president. The 25th Amendment was used by George W. Bush and Ronald Reagan for medical treatment. Now, supporters argue this legislation is about preparedness and not politics. The proposal comes as the Senate votes on Wednesday to curb Trump's Iran war powers and ahead of the November midterms that will determine Trump's power in the final 2 years of his presidency.
And now he's getting hit with the political shock of his life as Democrats are formally moving to remove him from office while he's sitting in the middle of a war that he started and while he's making rhetoric that sounds like genocide. The timing of all this is crucial. Air raid sirens have been sounding in Jerusalem. New explosions have been reported in Tehran as the U.S. and Israel trade fire with Iran. The message from the Pentagon and the White House is that the U.S. is winning and that larger waves of strikes are coming. Trump is arguing that striking Iran was necessary to keep the regime from developing a nuclear weapon. But the American public is not buying it. A new poll reveals that Americans do not support President Trump's moves. Lawmakers are considering requirements that the president must get congressional approval before any more military action.
And my colleague Susan Tehrani joins us live from New York at the moment to get us more on this. Susan, the Democrats, of course, upping the ante against Donald Trump as far as the Iran war is concerned. There is a lot of talk about the 25th Amendment being used. Get us more on how, now, of course, the opposition Democrats are planning to take this forward.
Yeah, this is just another, to be honest, blockbuster production brought to you by the same people that carried out 2 impeachments against the president during his first term, and then that January 6th commission that just dragged on, and an absolute nothing burger, for a lack of a better term, to waste everyone's time and resources. As you mentioned, the 25th Amendment was put forth in case a president gets assassinated, is sick, is injured. It wasn't put forth for someone to be removed from office because the other party simply doesn't agree with their policies. And as you mentioned, it's not only that both houses are controlled by the Republicans right now. The Democrats know this isn't going to go anywhere. But is J.D. Vance going to come on board? Is the president's entire cabinet going to come on board? They have to come on board as well.
This is not the first time Democrats have tried to end Trump's presidency early. We saw this happen before, right after January 6th. It was 2021. Trump had just incited a riot at the Capitol. Members of Congress were being attacked. There was a real national emergency happening. And Democratic leaders like Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer went public and demanded that Trump just leave office. They said, resign now or we're going to impeach you and we're going to do it immediately. The New York Times reported at the time that this threat turned the last 13 days of Trump's first term into what they called a national emergency. Officials were resigning in protest. Republican senators were breaking with Trump. There was serious talk of invoking the 25th Amendment to remove him because he was seen as a direct threat to the safety of Congress and the Capitol and democracy itself.
So they know that this is not going to get anywhere, but unfortunately decided to take this course as opposed to more important issues put forth after they had a long recess for Easter. And the first thing that they did, they decided to put on something and put forth something that is absolutely not going to go through. So a lot of Americans are frustrated, understandably, right now. They want Congress to work for them, and they believe that because this is just absolutely, just unlawful in many ways, it's just going to be a waste of time. But it is going to, heat up the midterms and the conversation around that. So the Democrats are hoping they can change the conversation regarding that.
Even back then, even with everything happening, even with the Capitol under siege, cutting his term short was still unlikely to actually happen because you need a 2/3 majority in the Senate to convict on impeachment, and Republicans control the Senate. But it proved one crucial thing. It proved that Democrats were willing to formally and publicly move against Trump when they saw him as a genuine threat to the country. It proved they wouldn't just accept him as president even if he was in his final days. It proved they had mechanisms and they were willing to use them. Now here we are in 2026 and Democrats are doing it again, but this time Trump is supposed to have years left in office. This time he just won re-election. This time Republicans control Congress. This time he should theoretically have more power and more support and more ability to survive removal threats. But instead, he's facing the same kind of pressure he faced at the end of his first term. Democrats are talking impeachment again. Democrats are talking about the 25th Amendment again. Democrats are introducing resolutions demanding his removal again. And the justification this time is his handling of the Iran war, his apocalyptic rhetoric about civilizations dying, and his apparent belief that he can wage war without getting Congress to approve it. Trump has been escalating strikes on Iran. He's been using language that sounds like he's threatening genocide. He's been ignoring Congress's constitutional power to declare war. He's been acting like he's a king who can do whatever he wants militarily without any oversight. And Democrats are saying that's too dangerous. Democrats are saying we can't allow a president to wage war unilaterally and make apocalyptic threats without being checked. Democrats are saying removing him from office might be necessary to protect the country. What's particularly stunning about this is Trump's apparent shock at it. Trump won the election. Trump should be riding high politically. Trump should be confident and in control. But instead, he's panicking, he's upset, he's lashing out, he's making erratic decisions, he's scrambling to maintain control of the narrative and maintain his political standing because he realized that even though Republicans control Congress, there's real talk from Democrats about removing him, or at least seriously threatening removal. There's real talk about the 25th Amendment. There's real talk about impeachment. And while it's unlikely to succeed given the Republican majority, the mere fact that Congress is openly debating his removal is damaging to his authority and damaging to his credibility and damaging to his ability to govern effectively. He's facing political losses on multiple fronts. His signature projects are stalling. His approval ratings are taking hits over the Iran war. His grip on power is not as secure as he thought it would be. And that's what's really shocking Trump right now. He expected dominance. He expected total control. He expected to be able to do whatever he wanted. And instead, he's getting resistance and removal threats. Let me explain what's actually happening with these removal efforts and what the mechanisms are and why Democrats think this is necessary right now. Because this is about more than just partisan politics. This is about whether the president can wage war without congressional approval and whether he can make threats that sound like genocide without being checked. Over 50 Democrats have publicly called for Trump's removal either through impeachment or through the 25th Amendment. Senators are making statements. House members are introducing resolutions. Committee leaders are publicly saying that Trump's actions constitute war crimes and that he's abusing the war powers that he was granted. The reporting from outlets like Axios and Politico shows that Democrats see this as a serious constitutional crisis, not just a political opportunity. This is a fundamental disagreement about the limits of presidential power. This is a constitutional crisis unfolding in real time. Let's dig into the actual mechanisms that Democrats could use to try to remove Trump, because understanding these tools is essential to grasping the full scope of what's happening right now. The first mechanism is impeachment. The House of Representatives can pass articles of impeachment by a simple majority. That's just more than 50% of the House. Democrats don't control the House, so impeachment articles coming from Democrats would require Republican support, which is basically impossible right now. But that doesn't stop them from introducing the articles and forcing a vote, because the vote itself becomes a political statement. It goes on record. It shows where every representative stands on the question of Trump's fitness for office. And if the vote is close, or if there are significant Republican defections, that becomes huge news and huge pressure on Trump. The second mechanism is the 25th Amendment. This is the constitutional tool that allows the vice president and a majority of the cabinet to declare that the president is unable to discharge the powers and duties of his office. If they do that, the president is temporarily removed and the vice president takes over. But the president can challenge that declaration, and then it goes to Congress and requires a 2/3 majority in both chambers to keep the president out of office permanently. So the 25th Amendment is actually extremely difficult to use because you need the vice president to turn against the president. You need a majority of the cabinet to turn against the president, and then you need a supermajority of Congress. Vice President J.D. Vance is not going to go against Trump. So the 25th Amendment is essentially off the table as an actual removal mechanism. But the fact that Democrats are talking about it, the fact that they're floating it as a possibility, the fact that the media is covering it, it all creates political pressure on Trump. The third mechanism is non-binding resolutions and war powers resolutions that force Trump to either scale back the Iran operation or face a showdown over whether he's violating the Constitution. These resolutions don't actually remove Trump, but they create a legal record of congressional opposition. They show that Congress is on record saying Trump is exceeding his authority. And if Trump ignores these resolutions and continues the Iran operation anyway, that becomes a basis for future impeachment articles. Democrats are building a case. They're creating a paper trail. They're establishing a record of Trump defying Congress and abusing war powers. And once you have that record, once you have that documented pattern of defiance, the argument for impeachment becomes much stronger. The strategy here mirrors exactly what Democrats did during Trump's first term. They would pass resolutions opposing his actions. They would try to constrain his powers through legislation. They would document every instance of him ignoring Congress or defying laws. And then they would use all of that as the basis for impeachment. And that's what they're doing now. They're tightening the noose incrementally. They're building a case against Trump methodically. They're creating a record that shows pattern and precedent of him abusing power. And then at some point, if circumstances warrant it, if the political moment is right, they can argue for actual removal. What's remarkable about this moment is how much this mirrors January 2021, when Democrats were also moving to end Trump's first term early. Back then, they had the urgency of immediate danger. The Capitol attack, the violence, the direct threat to members of Congress. This time, they don't have that same immediate crisis. They have a war that they believe is being mishandled and rhetoric that they believe is dangerous, but it's not the same kind of acute emergency. So Democrats are having to make a more measured, more procedural argument. They're having to say that Trump's pattern of behavior over time, his rhetoric about civilizations dying, his disregard for congressional war powers, his escalation of military action without approval, all of that combined shows he's unfit. They're not saying it's an emergency right now. They're saying the pattern and trajectory is dangerous and we need to act before things get worse. Now, Trump's reaction to all this has been absolutely telling. Trump won re-election. Trump should be confident and powerful right now. But instead, Trump is panicking. Trump is making erratic decisions. Trump is lashing out at people around him. Trump is scrambling to maintain control. Why? Because even though Republicans control Congress, and even though removal is unlikely, the mere fact that Congress is openly debating his removal is destabilizing. It's weakening his authority. It's creating doubt about his leadership. It's feeding into a narrative that he's out of control and dangerous. And Trump hates that narrative. Trump can't stand the idea that people are questioning his fitness for office. Trump needs everyone to believe he's strong and in control and unquestionable. So when Democrats start talking about removing him, even if it's just talk, even if it won't actually succeed, Trump panics because his entire power depends on the perception of strength and control. The economic and political fallout from all this is significant. Markets get nervous when there's talk of removing the president, even if it's unlikely. Businesses get uncertain about the political situation. Investors worry about what happens if there's actually a constitutional crisis. Geopolitically, allies worry about America's ability to conduct foreign policy. When the president's fitness is being publicly questioned, Trump's authority to wage the Iran war actually gets weaker if Congress is openly debating whether he even has the power to wage it. His credibility gets damaged. His ability to maintain the coalition for the war gets compromised. And all of that plays into Democrats' hands because it makes it harder for Trump to actually execute the war policy he wants to execute. I want to break down the core issues and what this means going forward. The first issue is the comparison to January 2021 and what that tells us about whether Democrats will actually try to remove Trump this time. After the Capitol attack, Democrats moved aggressively toward impeachment. They had the votes to pass impeachment articles in the House, but they knew they didn't have the votes to convict in the Senate because Republicans control the Senate. So impeachment happened, but conviction was always unlikely. This time, the situation is reversed. Democrats don't control the House and don't control the Senate, so they can't actually impeach Trump or convict him. But they can make noise about it. They can introduce resolutions. They can create political pressure. They can damage Trump's authority and credibility, even if they can't actually remove him. So the question becomes whether they'll use these tools aggressively enough to actually constrain Trump's behavior and force him to scale back the Iran war, or whether they'll just make symbolic gestures. The second issue is the question of Republican defections and whether any Republican senators are so concerned about the Iran war that they might actually vote for removal if it came down to it. We know that some Republican senators are uneasy about the war. We know that some Republicans have concerns about Trump's rhetoric and his handling of foreign policy. We know that some Republicans worry about the political consequences of being seen as enabling an endless war. But are any of them actually willing to vote to remove a president from their own party? That's a much higher bar. That's career-ending for most politicians. That's a betrayal of party loyalty that Republicans would struggle to come back from. So while there might be Republican concerns about the war, there probably isn't any actual Republican support for removing Trump through impeachment or the 25th Amendment, which means Democrats are limited in what they can actually achieve legislatively. The third issue is whether this removal talk actually forces Trump to change his behavior or scale back the Iran war. If Democrats can create enough political pressure, if they can make it clear that escalating the war further will lead to serious removal efforts, then Trump might actually back down. Trump might decide it's not worth the political cost to continue escalating. Trump might decide to pivot to a strategy that gets Congress more involved and more supportive. Or Trump might double down and ignore the removal threats and escalate anyway, which would play into Democrats' hands by creating a pattern of defiance that feeds impeachment arguments. Either way, the mere fact that removal is being discussed forces Trump to calculate the political cost of his decisions in a way he might not otherwise have done. The fourth issue that deserves serious consideration is what happens if Democrats do actually move forward with serious impeachment or 25th Amendment efforts despite knowing they'll fail. There's a political cost to that. It looks like they're just using removal as a political weapon. It alienates some voters who think Democrats should accept election results instead of trying to remove a president who just won re-election. It could actually harm Democratic prospects in future elections if voters see it as overreach. So Democrats have to make a calculation about whether the political benefit of pressuring Trump outweighs the political cost of appearing to be trying to overturn an election result. That's a tough calculation. That's a real dilemma, and different Democrats will come down on different sides of it. The bottom line is that Democrats have the constitutional mechanisms to pressure Trump and to threaten removal, but they probably don't have the political support to actually remove him. So we're in a kind of political limbo where Democrats can make removal threats and create political pressure, but Trump is unlikely to actually be removed from office. That doesn't mean the removal talk is pointless, though. The pressure itself can constrain Trump's behavior. The media coverage itself can damage his credibility. The congressional debate itself can weaken his authority internationally. So even if Trump survives these removal efforts and stays in office, the mere fact that Congress is openly debating his fitness damages his ability to govern and damages his political standing. What you need to watch for going forward is whether Democrats escalate from talk to actual formal removal efforts. Do they introduce impeachment articles? Do they force a vote? Do they actually move forward with the procedural steps toward removal? Or do they just keep threatening and make noise without following through? Because there's a difference between creating political pressure and actually following through on removal efforts. If Democrats are serious, they need to introduce articles and force votes and create a real constitutional process, even if they know it will fail. If they don't do that, if they just talk about removal without actually moving forward, then it's just empty political rhetoric, and Trump will likely treat it as such and ignore it. The other thing to watch is whether the Iran war actually escalates or de-escalates. Because if the war escalates dramatically, if there are major casualties, if it becomes deeply unpopular, then the political pressure on Trump mounts and the case for removal becomes stronger. But if the war winds down or stabilizes or becomes less of a domestic political issue, then the urgency of removal efforts probably fades. So the trajectory of the Iran conflict is directly connected to the trajectory of Trump removal efforts. And Trump knows that, which is why he's probably going to try to wind down the war, or at least make it look less dramatic and less destabilizing than it currently looks. The fundamental question here is whether the American political system has any real constraints on presidential power anymore, or whether a president can just do whatever he wants as long as he controls his own party in Congress. Democrats are arguing that removal threats are one of the few remaining constraints. They're arguing that if Congress is willing to actually move toward removal, that forces a president to think twice before abusing power. But if Congress never actually follows through on those threats, if Congress never actually moves forward with removal procedures, then those threats are meaningless. They're just noise. And Trump learns that he can ignore Congress and there are no real consequences. So what happens over the next few months and few years is going to determine whether Congress still has any real power to check a president, or whether we're in an era where the president is basically supreme and Congress has become irrelevant. That's the stakes of this conflict. What's particularly important to understand about this moment is that Democrats are not just making noise. They're laying the foundation for actual removal efforts if circumstances warrant it. They're building a legal record. They're documenting Trump's actions. They're establishing a paper trail that shows a consistent pattern of Trump ignoring Congress and abusing his war powers. If they do eventually move toward impeachment articles, they'll have months of documented violations to point to. They'll have evidence of Congress passing resolutions that Trump ignored. They'll have a clear record of him exceeding his authority. The strategy mirrors exactly what Democrats did during Trump's first term when they built the case for his second impeachment. They weren't just randomly attacking Trump. They were methodically documenting his actions and building a foundation for constitutional proceedings. Now they're doing the same thing with the Iran war. They're being deliberate. They're being strategic. They're not rushing. They're taking time to build the case so that when they do move toward removal efforts, they have overwhelming documentation. What also matters here is that this removal talk, even though it's unlikely to succeed, sends a message to other presidents going forward. It says that if you abuse your war powers dramatically enough, if you ignore Congress consistently enough, if you make threats that sound like genocide, Congress has the tools to threaten removal. Congress can create political pressure. Congress can damage your authority and credibility. Congress can constrain your behavior, even if they can't actually remove you. That's an important message for the future of presidential power and the constraints on that power. The question that really matters going forward is whether Democrats will actually follow through on these removal threats, or whether this is just empty political talk. If they don't follow through, if they just make noise without taking actual procedural steps toward removal, then Trump learns that he can ignore these threats and there are no real consequences. But if Democrats do introduce articles of impeachment, if they force votes, if they create a real constitutional process, then they're sending a powerful message about the limits of presidential power, even if Trump ultimately survives the removal effort. There's also a psychological element here that's important to understand. Trump has always believed he's untouchable. Trump has always believed that because he controls the Republican Party, nobody can actually do anything to him. Trump has always believed that loyalty from his own party is absolute and unquestionable. But now, even with Republicans controlling Congress, he's facing removal threats from Democrats. Even with Republican support, he's seeing his authority damaged and his credibility questioned. And that's psychologically unsettling for Trump. Trump needs to feel like he's winning. Trump needs to feel like he's dominant. Trump needs to feel like everyone respects him and fears him. Having Congress openly debate his removal, having Democrats formally threaten to end his term, having to deal with these kinds of constitutional challenges, that undermines Trump's narrative of dominance and control. That's part of why Trump is panicking right now. He won the election. He should be at the height of his power. He should be feeling victorious and strong and in control. But instead, he's having to defend himself against removal threats from Congress. He's having to worry about whether his own party will eventually turn on him. He's having to calculate the political cost of his decisions in ways he didn't anticipate. And that's causing him genuine stress and genuine concern. Because Trump knows that even though removal is unlikely with Republicans in Congress, the very fact that Congress is debating his fitness for office is damaging to his presidency in ways that can't be easily repaired. So the bottom line going forward is that we're in a genuine constitutional standoff. Democrats are threatening removal. Trump is dismissing those threats. Republicans are either defending Trump or staying quiet. And nobody really knows where this ends up, or whether it escalates into an actual crisis, or whether it winds down as just political talk. What we do know is that the relationship between Congress and the presidency has fundamentally changed. Congress is no longer completely deferential to Trump. Congress is willing to formally threaten removal. Congress is willing to challenge his authority. And that's a significant shift in the dynamics of the American political system. The war in Iran continues. The rhetoric from the White House remains apocalyptic, and the constitutional crisis deepens with every passing day. Americans are watching a battle for the soul of the presidency unfold in real time. And the outcome of this battle will determine the future of executive power in this country for generations to come.